Turns out this is one of those games in which I actually managed to win without too many problems, and I think actually no real problems at all, maybe an inaccuracy or two, but it's a very practical game, exploiting the opponent's mistakes, blunders, without making my own serious mistakes or blunders. Winning material also helps to win the game, of course, and essentially black's position just collapses. And as you can see from this, the opening is again an English opening, but this time black plays the Scandinavian version, now typically in e4 lines where black contests the king's pawn opening version with d5. You probably get a very decent position without too much trouble with different kind of lines. And it's not different actually for the English opening, except it's much worse due to the fact that this d5 pawn, which is a central pawn for the queen, central pawn for the queen side, will be exchanged immediately for gain of tempo for a flank pawn, which traditionally from Tarrasch onwards is usually seen as a benefit for white only. Black will want to claim that the quick exchange supports them in one way or another, but in this game it went really bad quickly. Either way, queen d8 all the way back, very passive, perhaps the most passive option you could choose from this position, maybe the safest, soundest. Not exposing yourself to too much, but usually it's a good idea, I guess, to put the queen on a5. d4 expanding in the center, knight c6 attacking the pawn. Black's idea, I've noticed when I'm playing these games, is to try to get bishop g4 in, use the knight, perhaps play a pawn to e6 or e5, and try to cause white to lose castling rights, or to exchange the knight on f3 to weaken the pawn structure, obviously, to try and win a pawn. But it's not too difficult to avoid it for benefit to white, strategically and tactically. I just think black is a bit desperate in this opening, and for some reason my opponent goes e5 immediately. But what can you do? I don't know if black tried to play some kind of gambit line or whatever, but it feels very inferior to many of the different lines you could have played from this kind of position. And it fails for the following reason, that after d5 you lose defense of the pawn, and if pawn e5, let's show it, right? If pawn e5 here, I think it's clear what's going on. You just capture the pawn without going into any of these kinds of complications, which I think still just helps white, but you avoid it all. You still get a good position, and you get it by claiming black has no activity. Black retreats all the way to e7, again very passive retreating moves, not sure how it benefits their position. Going to d4 makes more sense, but you're losing the pawn anyway, right? Now this is the very immediate knight takes, or you could just play knight takes e5 and the game's over, you know. I'm not even sure what's the point of not losing a piece if you're going to gambit in this way. But anyway, let's just say you capture the knight, right? And you get this type of position. Black has no activity. All these moves I've been going backwards. Continuing, I just win the pawn. He attacks the center, 3 pieces. And there's still no way for him to get the pawn, because usually you would have wanted to exchange this e pawn and then have a minor piece to defend the pawn, but that's never happening. So I just advance. They try to develop the bishop, but look how passive this position is. You cannot imagine that black will ever survive. Bishop e2 is not necessary. f4 is a good alternative. Bishop e3 is a possible alternative. But I think it's just to prevent every little detail possible. I will have to move my knight. I don't want the bishop to come to g4. I mean, it's just focusing on obviously the very minor details, but ultimately, even though it's maybe an inaccurate move, the position is just completely hopeless for black from here on out. He might as well have been down the entire minor piece, as you can see from the evaluation. But just looking at this position after his bishop moves, his queen will be a permanent target if the queen tries to develop. Because of knight c4, there's no checks. c6 doesn't do anything. I'll just advance my pawn. It's just, I would resign, but okay. I'm showing this game primarily because, in one sense, I was worried that it's difficult to win this position, that I would make a mistake or something. But apparently the Stockfish engine gave its blessing that there was no real problem, and that's why I'm showing it, because it's a good example of converting these positions. Now something obvious will come up. Castle, castle, 97. I don't want to exchange. Again, it's probably an insignificant detail, practically speaking, but exchanging helps develop the bishop, helps develop the queen, maybe, probably not the queen, at least it's even worse, I guess. But black gets the move to play. I see no point in doing it. Let's constrict them. Knight c4. I think it's the computer move as well. Knight c4, h6. I don't know what they're doing. To help the king? Probably not. To play for g5. For some dream of getting an attack on the king side. Again, black is not prepared for any attack. Attacking the pawn. Attacking the bishop. But this is now a target, right? Just as we can see from h4, h5 advances, g4 advances, there's also f4 in this kind of structure. And black can't tolerate these pawns in the center if this f5 gets played, as far as I'm concerned. Knight g6, it doesn't do anything. I just calmly develop. And again, exchanges. Now this time, they make sense to exchange. Or at least, it doesn't harm black's position at all, white's position at all. And I think as well, if you exchange, get the knight away or the bishop or something away from this f4 square, and then you push f4, you just blow open black's position. As we can see, the moment the knight disappears, you try to exploit that square. And before black can do anything, he's just lost. So obviously mandatory exchange, but now you move back, and now I just win more pawns. I don't know why he moved back, but what can you do? Bishop d7 loses the pawn. King h6, king h7 loses the pawn. Not the pawn, I guess, but you know, exposing the king. This diagonal. But that would have been something interesting, I guess. What to do? Because I would, you know, at this point probably just try to exchange pieces, win These pawns are so weak. Maybe reposition. But it's just a long game for not much happening. And again, you can see exchanging the pawns and things. I'm not sure how accurate it is. The square can be moved too, but it probably doesn't matter because there's no associated queen b6. An ability to really attack these pawns with these flank advances. But oh well, game continues. So maybe we can say black collapsed. Best move apparently, if you give the computer enough time to think, g3. There's no real attack happening, but before black can even think about attacking, you want to stop it from happening. But obviously, it's an improvement on the bishop to be on the square. Nothing can attack it like this, only exchange, and then the knight will exchange. But again, it's not a position where black can manage any kind of survival, unless white seriously messes this up, which has been happening a lot in my games. Attacking the queen just to get f6 into play, weakening g6, stopping the bishop from retreating and defending the king side. Everything is coming too late. c6 is completely completely failed, completely dismal, unapologetically late, fruitless, I don't know. Choose an adjective. I just take, and it's a surprise. They blunder the queen, but again, the game's just lost, right? But for some reason, I don't know what's my opponent doing in this entire session. But either way, as we continue, we exchange, and now you can again see the spin happening. Black never really manages to develop, tries to develop, and you can see the obvious move, rook d7 check, I don't know, king goes somewhere, king j8, you capture. Give the computer enough time, somehow, taking on a8, apparently, with about, what, 3-4 minutes that I spent on this. Apparently it's better, it feels practically better because you're removing a very strong major piece, and this bishop is very useless, and you will have to waste time to come back, and you can just check him again possibly for the skewer with the remaining rook. Again, I don't know what my opponent is doing, desperately trying for counterplay, but at this stage you're down so many points of material. There's nothing really to do. Taking on a7, apparently not the best move. But at this point, I'm basically just trying to tell my opponent, you can resign. And there's nothing to do. I don't even have to play the best kind of moves. Things like bringing the king to the center, bringing the bishop out, bringing the knight to d5. Or even, you know, rook d8, or b4, advance, I can immediately capture. It's just practically lost. No immediate anti-squares, but considering how my opponent has been playing, I was guessing they're going to play f5. So, again, just capture the pawn, and what's your opponent going to do? And then you're threatening discovered check, winning a piece. Almost. Goes there. And the idea is quite obvious. Again, I don't know what's going on. So let's just quickly move through these last moves. Check. There's apparently a mate in 26 moves, 14 moves. I'm not going to calculate that. Too much. So I was thinking again, practical decision. Attacking the pawn, discover check, exchange. Grabs the pawn, not really a problem, you know. Every piece coming off just increases my chances of winning. Again, not playing the fastest, not playing the quickest route to victory, but what to do, right? You can obviously just do this. You can do so many things. But everything feels so unnecessary. Again, the bishop can't do too much. No targets. Always being threatened to exchange. And loses, I think, on time. So it's a fair result. My opponent, unfortunately, didn't play their best chess, I guess. First time playing them. But this sort of thing happens, you know. I have played many games like this, where I'm the one losing in this manner, and it's very unfortunate. And you always hope your opponent can play better, that you can have a much more decent experience, or at least for them as well. I mean, this is just terrible to play. You don't want to play chess like this, and you feel like you're wasting your time, I think, if you're on the receiving end of this kind of position. It just feels like you can't do anything. So I hope to see some people maybe watching this video and then see them in the Lichess arena tournaments, the Rapid, the Blitz, things like that, where we have more videos coming, and hopefully kinds of grudge matches, very challenging rematches where it's not clear cut who is going to win.